Welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me on my website, which is mikebrennan.me. And while you're there, I would love for you to check out the resources that I've created with you in mind, because I love to see fellow creators win. I say this all the time, and I really believe it. I believe that when you create, we all win. And so with that in mind, I've created resources for you to show up more consistently and to pour into your creativity so that you can get traction on those creative projects that you've been meaning to do for quite some time. And if that's you, procrastination is the thing that you regularly deal with or don't deal with. Maybe even this episode you've been procrastinating on listening to for some time, but now you're here. Well, today's guest, Robin J. Emdon, we talk about procrastination because Robin has something that has really unlocked the ability to get moving, to see results, to be productive. And he's had the experience of procrastinating for years and not seeing the fruit of the results that he wants because he wasn't taking action. There wasn't clarity. And so today's conversation is candid. It's great. It's insightful. And I know you're going to get a lot out of it. And be sure to lean in. Robin shares some practical tips on how to push past our procrastination. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Robin J. Emdon. Well, Robin, welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and find out more about your podcast.
Yes, and I had the pleasure of being on yours. And so we got to connect previously and just had a delightful time there. Looking forward to today, just turning the tables a little bit and finding out more about you, what you do and how you do it. And, talking about being productive, getting things done, seeing results. I mean, I think that is something that every, especially creative person who's listening to this podcast today needs more of, because so many times I think it's the cry of the creative of like, I've got all these open projects or maybe I haven't started them. They're open loops in my brain and I haven't actually taken action on stuff. I need some help. I need some traction here. And so I'm sure some of the things we talk about today will be very practical and helpful for those folks. So I'm excited. My first question for you though is I want to know, like, when you were a kid, were there certain creative activities that you were involved in that stand out to you that were like maybe made an impression on you or made you think, you know what, I am a creative person?
Gosh, so long ago. Yes, as I often say to people, maybe you know one or two children yourself. Maybe you were even one yourself once. But yeah, I think so. Yes, I mean, I guess a common thread that goes through my life, if you look at it from a purely academic point of view, is I've always been drawn to the arts and humanities, as we call it at university level. He says, being unintentionally posh there, maybe intentionally posh. I guess you've taken me right back. I am remembering probably my second class at what we call in Britain primary school. So I would have been 6, and I was very into art then. In fact, I was telling my own son, who's an adult now, he's actually an illustrator, so he's artistic and a creative writer. And I was telling him the other day, we were watching some program, a jokey program, and they were messing around with paint. And they said, I wonder what happens when you mix this color with that color. And I said, I know exactly what happens. They go brown. And he said, how do you know that? And I said, because I remember sitting at the back of in the hall behind the classroom with my friend, opening all the brand new tins of multicolored school paints and mixing them together to see what weird and wonderful and wacky colors we could create, and discovering that eventually when you add black, they all go brown.
Yes.
And so that's just me messing around as a kid. But I do remember also, I cannot paint to save my life. Your beautiful pictures behind you that I know are your own work, in 100 lifetimes, I would never be able to do anything more than a really badly drawn stick man, but I do enjoy the arts. I really appreciate art, and I always have done, even as a kid. If my dad took me to museums and galleries and we went to look at the art, I was glued. I was fascinated. I loved it. And I always say, I said to you when we met on my podcast the other day, and thank you for you doing that. The check's still in the post. I'm sorry if you haven't got it yet. But I'm very, I like to think I have a good eye for art. So when I say I like something, I'm not pretending that I'm just making that up to to flatter somebody. I genuinely can see that's actually a really good piece of art. And I guess at primary school and when I was little, I lived in the countryside. Nature was always very much filling my life, filling my vision, filling everything. And so, yeah, I can't say that because I discovered that I have no artistic ability. It hasn't been a big theme of my life from a point of view of doing, but from a point of view of appreciating. I've always appreciated art and still do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always talk about with people too is that, creativity is so much bigger than just being artistic. And creativity finds its way into us solving problems in the way we see the world and what we do in response to that. And I know that you have created things because obviously, you have a book and you've created a system and a pathway for people to be able to be more productive and get results. And so that whole thing is a creative process that you enter into to be able to say, this didn't exist prior to this, and now it does. And so even if it doesn't look like art, paintings, music, things that we would consider the arts, creativity is still at work, I believe, in every single one of us. And so I always love to just kind of poke around and see, like, is there something that maybe was like set early on in our lives that helped shape our process when it comes to creating the way we think about things, kind of what's important to us. Because so often there are some kind of building blocks, and even if it's not like a one for one type of thing where it looks exactly like it did when we were a kid, there are seeds of things, you know what I mean? So that's, I
Yes.
guess I'm kind of probing around to see if there's any of those kind of things that maybe come to mind.
Yeah, all right. So I'll go back to when I was 6. And I did write books when I was 6, illustrated books with my friend Richard Lowe. And we used to, was it? Yeah, it was Richard. And we used to go up to my teacher. She was known by the other children as the Dragon. She was actually called Mrs. Webster, and she was lovely. She just gave the impression to people that didn't know her that she was scary. And we used to, in our own time, not without prompting, we wrote these tiny books which had a character in it, which was a little tiny character, very plainly drawn, and writing that was so small you'd need almost a microscope to read it, which was kind of our gimmick. So we did small writing, and we did the small character, a little illustration on every page, and we worked on these jointly just for fun. So yeah, I've been writing books since I was 6. I guess the other thing is that my growing up, my family have always run businesses, and my father was very creative. My father was a talented tenor in the opera world, and before I was born, he'd been a professional singer for the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London. So there was always music around me as well, because he never stopped singing. Although he'd finished his career before I was born, he never stopped singing. And so we had the double edge of there was that there were a lot of creatives around me because of his connection with the singing world. And the other side of it was that we tended to think outside the box. In Britain, most people are brought up to be good employees. I'm a terrible
Yeah.
employee. My family were brought up to be entrepreneurs, and I can't do anything different. And if you are an entrepreneur, you have to be creative by definition.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we were
Yeah.
always, I guess the point was that my family, my elders at that time, were always thinking outside the box, always thinking creatively. How can we do this? How can we do that? And when I took over the family business in the 80s and 90s, I had quite a lot of responsibility for gardens around we had retail shops, but they had gardens in the countryside. And I used to be at my element when I couldn't garden to save my life, but I could pay a gardener to do it, and I knew exactly what I wanted.
So you were art directing. That's all.
I was art directing. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly right.
That's awesome. I love that you had the ability to have that front row seat for people modeling what this looks like for you to be able to have that kind of career and even just the mindset that has to go into things of being an entrepreneur and doing your own thing. When people don't have something to look to, it makes it that much more difficult to know, am I even on track? Is this working? Who do I look to? Who do I ask questions to? And so to have that right in front of you, that surely it was a gift for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think the other thing was that you forget from childhood is, but you kind of, or maybe you don't forget them, but I certainly pine after it. Is so much time in which there's nothing happening. You're on. You've got. I mean, I have a much older brother, so I basically grew up as an only child, which meant I had nothing but time on my hands during the holidays, thinking time, creative thinking time. I can't sing, unlike my late father who had a gorgeous voice. I can't sing to save my life, but I used to sing and hum to myself all the time. And that thinking time, that's when I was at my most creative. And I wasn't there. I was directionless, I guess. I wasn't thinking about what am I going to do for the rest of my life. But I remember my friend Richard Lowe decided that when we were asked at school what we were going to do, I said, well, I'm going to go into business. When the teacher said, what are you going to do when you grow up? I'm going into business. And my friend Richard came up with, I'm going to be a hobo, a tramp. Made us all laugh. But the point is that in adulthood, we don't have, unless we make a point of it, enough time to think and be creative. And it's certainly one of the things that when I'm working with clients and when I think about my own life, you have to take some time off. You have to. You know, if you want that epiphany in the shower about, aha, that's what I got to do, it's not going to come because she's like, oh, I've got 5 minutes to have a shower and then I'm on to my next meeting. It's going to come probably at the end of a long weekend when you've basically done very little but just relax. And then in the shower, it'll be like, oh, that's what I was trying to think of. And I
Yeah.
still have those moments all the time. And that's, I think we all do. But I think for me, that doesn't happen if I'm just busy, 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 busy. And I have to stop. I have to force myself to stop and think. And that does come from childhood, recognizing that that's what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Creating margin is so important because if we just fill the space constantly, we don't give ourselves the place to think because we're just distracted and occupied. And
Yes.
sometimes we need to learn how to be bored again. I don't think like kids today don't know what that is. They don't know bored because there's everything is always at their fingertips. And
These things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a different challenge to figure out how do we get the next generations to have that thinking time and to be bored so that they can wander in their thoughts and ask questions and not simply just react and respond to whatever stimuli is before them. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, obviously you talk about getting results, and you've written this book, Get Resultsology, the science of getting stuff done. Where has that come from? Like, why is that important to you?
Well, I think going back to your introduction, when we're thinking about maybe people listening or watching this in terms of if they're stuck, if they're getting stuck, if procrastination is an issue for them, or they're just not getting enough done, they just want to be more productive. The critical thing is you need to identify that that's what's going on. The biggest problem that I come across when I'm working, when I talk to people is there are people who genuinely never procrastinate when it really matters. Everyone procrastinates a little bit. It's not a big deal. But if you're a chronic procrastinator, it becomes a big deal. And the biggest issue is identifying it. So my story is possibly a sobering story in the terms of how not to do it. So I trained to be a life coach way back in 2000, 2001 with Tony Robbins in San Diego. And this was before he had his coaching program where he trains people to be coaches. I think he was doing private coaching, and I trained to be on his team for that. I won't go into more detail about that, other than to say within a couple of years, I lived in Britain. He needed me in San Diego, and so that it didn't work out that we that I worked for him, but I certainly got the training, which was brilliant. And then I came back to Britain, set up in business, and within a couple of years, life was such that I became a full-time single dad. And I made a conscious decision to put the coaching down and then focus on my family. And then cut forward to 2019. And I'm sat in a coffee shop with my older brother and I'm bragging, I just got my degree. Yay. Because I didn't have a chance to finish my education and I was at school age. I was like, yes, I've finally done it. I've done it at home. And my brother was not impressed. Older brothers, siblings, whatever. And so I said, mind you, I said, still enthusing about it. I said, mind you, trust me to take 10 years to do something that I should have done in 6. And he said, yeah, why was that? Why did it take you 10 years and not 6? And I said, oh, no, procrastination. And I laughed and he kind of laughed and we changed the subject. And then when I was driving home, I was thinking about that and I was thinking, wait a minute, you're a trained coach. You don't forget the skills. They're very powerful skill sets. You don't forget them. But I thought, you're a trained coach. You can't procrastinate. I never had a client that procrastinates. Well, I've had clients that have procrastination issues, but they don't procrastinate when I coach them. Thought, okay, there's something wrong with that picture. I shouldn't be procrastinating. I should be a master of not procrastinating. So what's going on there? And then I asked myself 2 coaching questions, which are, where else in my life does this pop up? And I thought, absolutely everywhere. And the second question was what does it cost me? And as I thought about the cost and I started telling myself the truth, probably for the first time in 20 years, I realized it's cost me a lot. And by the time I got home, I was very upset and very angry with myself, right? And that set me on this quest for so the first thing I did, I rang my brother and I said, by the way, because my brother at the time was a mental health professional. And I said, by the way, what's the cure for procrastination? I said to him naively, thinking I had a mental pen and paper there. And he just gave me a line. I go, oh, yeah, of course, that's what it is. I just keep forgetting. And there was a sharp intake of breath at the other end of the phone and silence. And then, I don't actually know, was the answer. He probably does now because we've talked about it quite a bit since then. But at the time, it was like, oh, well, that was disappointing. I was expecting him to say that. So I started researching it and I discovered I didn't need to research it per se. I mean, first of all, the gift that keeps on giving, COVID, as in I'm being ironic there, it's a horrible thing. But it meant that in lockdown, I had even more time on my hands than I normally had. So I started researching it. And I discovered that in one 10-year period in the early 2000s, just one 10-year period as an example, over 900 research projects had been done into procrastination and productivity. I think it was the most researched field of psychology in the world at the time. And obviously that was just in one 10-year period. So I thought, well, I don't need to do any new research. I just need to see what's out there. And fortunately, because I had just finished a degree, I knew how to sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of what's good research, what isn't. So it's no good if only 3 people have been in the project and then you conclude X, Y, Z, So that's no good. It's got to be proper research. And so I was sifting through it. And as I was sorting and sifting through it, that's when I had the idea, well, I need to write this down. And I'm a communicator. As you can probably tell, I can talk for England. And I hope that people will appreciate that I can communicate clearly what I'm trying to say, although I waffle a bit, probably quite a lot. But I can communicate. And I thought, well, that's what I need to do. I need to take the science because I'm not a scientist. My last exam at school, I got 9% in biology when I was at school. And I only got the 9% because I spelt my name right, because the teacher felt sorry for me because he knew how awful I was at it. Literally, I didn't answer any questions. I thought, I got 9% for spelling my name right. Wow. So I can't understand science, but I can understand it long enough to think, well, how can I turn that into plain English? And that's what I've done in the book, because there is a science. There's a neurological science and there's a biological science. There's a psychological science behind procrastination. I thought, right, I need to communicate this. And so that's how I came about with the book. But going full circle, it took me 20 years to realize that I had a problem. One of the first things I mentioned in the book was, up until that point, I used to say, oh, I procrastinated today. Oh, well, like I had a common cold. I mean, before COVID, people thought, oh, he's got a cold, whatever. You just work through it. You get over it. Oh, I'm procrastinating today. Never mind. There's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. A week later, there's always tomorrow. A month later, there's always tomorrow. A year later, there's always tomorrow. 20 years later, what the heck have I done with the last 20 years? No, I don't regret what I've done with the last 20 years. I've got some wonderful children that are now adults, and I've done other things in my life. I got my degree and all of that stuff. But there are so many things that didn't get done because I never recognized procrastination was something I needed to address. Yeah. And that is something that I still come across regularly now when I'm talking to people, I don't suffer from procrastination. 2, 3 out of 10 are telling the absolute truth. They don't. That's fine. I mean, they've just got better coping mechanisms for it. They manage it better. But quite a lot of people are just in denial. And that's fine. If they don't want to call it that, they don't have to call it that. I just say, well, okay, do you want to get more productive? Yes, please. All right, well, we'll work on getting more productive then. Because procrastination goes away when you're more productive anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. So many times I've heard that people say things that we can create, things that we bring into this world, a lot of times we're solving our own problems. And certainly you're writing this book and helping people and coaching people is probably serving you like the 10, 20 years ago version of you and going like, that's the person I need to speak to because I've lived that. I understand the pitfalls. I understand the regret and the waking up in that moment and going like, wow, yeah, like what happened here and what didn't happen here, and wanting to help save other people from that pain and that experience. What do you think is most common for people as far as why they're procrastinating? Like, is there one common theme?
Yeah, well, there's two, I guess. First, there's the kind of people that I'm talking to are people that work from home and have no boss. If you have a boss and they're any good at their job, they will not let you procrastinate for long. You might, there's an awful lot of procrastination in the traditional workplace. It costs in the trillions of dollars worth of cost to the economy every year, but it's much less than when you have no boss working from home. So when you're working from home, I've got a nice coffee machine. I've got a lovely view from my window. I've got a nice office that I like working in. I've got a nice broadband connection, computer that works, hopefully, fingers crossed. All right, I've got all of that. But the one thing I can't recreate, it's only one thing I can't recreate is accountability. And yet when I have a boss, I'm a terrible employee, but my goodness, I will not let my boss down. I do my best. But at the moment, when I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror, that's the boss looking back. Now, he's a lunatic, but he's my lunatic. So I love that. But I've also got to think about, okay, but there's no accountability. So if I choose not to work today, no one is going to tell me off. No one. I would never let clients down or anything like that. But when it's my time, when it's just what I want to get done today, no one's going to tell me off. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, is the much bigger issue. People procrastinate. I guess what I discovered was because I didn't discover it, but I haven't discovered anything. But what I realized was that it's because they're not passionate enough about something. And in my book is split into 3 sections. It's split into understand the problem, because when you understand it, it's like I want to teach people to fish rather than give them the fish. So when they understand, I'm procrastinating right now, they can do something about it today and not have regrets tomorrow, right? Because today, once they've understood they're procrastinating and probably why, definitely why if they read my book, then they can then go into the second part of the book, which is strategizing. And I've got a whole pick and mix of strategies, because no one strategy works for one person, two different people the same way. So I created the best of the best strategies. I think I found the best of the best strategies that work. And then the third section is all about momentum, because I've got a cupboard full of planners of some of the most wonderful systems, and I highly recommend all of them to you, but they're in a cupboard. There's a reason for that, and that is because they only work for a while. You have to find ways of creating momentum. So really what I'm getting at is, if you don't have a really, really strong idea of what you want and why you want it, you will struggle with procrastination. So I've got one of the 9 chapters, and I consider it the most important chapter in the book, is dedicated to getting crystal clear about what I've just called the term personal life vision. Not goals. Goals, I discovered from the research, ironically, the research says actually create an obligation which creates stress. And when you're stressed, you procrastinate. So you have to move beyond goals. You need that vision. And in the book, I use a very simple visualization. Suppose you just want to be a medical doctor. Medical doctors, maybe say you want to be an oncologist. Now, I'm not in the medical profession, but I think you're probably looking at what, 10, 15 years of training before you get to the level of you can say you're specializing as an oncologist, something like that. So if you know that when you're doing something today that you hate doing, but you know that little thing that you've got to get done today is so that in 15 years' time you'll be that oncologist that you want to be, or chiropodist, or whatever artist, world acclaimed artist, whatever it is you want to be, you'll do it because it's something that you're passionate about. But if you're and you do it because it's A, what you want, and B, because it's why you want it, which I always tie back into, well, what's your life purpose, right? I don't know what your life purpose is. If you don't know what your life purpose is, you do, but you need to verbalize it and get clear about it so that it's like, yeah, that's why I'm doing it. I talk about the analogy because a lot of housewives, and I was a house dad. It's not, how you begin your day is like, where the heck are my son's shoes? Where did he put them last night? Right? That's about as far removed from my vision is I'm going to be a world-class accountability coach. So what I learned to do now is my kids are grown up now, but what I learned to do now is I spend some time in the morning just focusing on getting my mindset right for the day, which includes engaging with my personal life vision. And I wrote in the book, I encourage people to write it down, but only so that they can create an image in their mind, whether their vision is visual, auditory, kinesthetic, everybody's different, or whatever works. For you, it would be visual because you're clearly a visual person. For me, it's visual, but not everybody is like that. It has to be in your mind. Auditory would probably be written down, words, and constant reminders. So yeah, it comes back to once you know what you want and why you want it, because the why brings in emotion, and that's critical. What you want is too clinical and academic. Which is why one of the reasons I did struggle with my degree. I couldn't stand some of the academia, but some of the other stuff I loved. But the emotional has to be emotionally engaging.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense because so many times I think people jump to strategy and method before they drill down enough to go, what is it that I even want? Why is it that I want it? Like, what are my values? Like all the deeper stuff that maybe seems a little bit more slippery and ethereal to kind of grab a hold onto. I think people probably think, what is that really going to do in terms of getting me results? Like it's the strategy stuff. That's where you actually start taking action and doing things and but I've seen and I've even experienced at times in my life when I've tried a certain tool or method and like you said, it ends up that you put it aside because you feel like it's this outside thing coming to you that is forcing you to do something that feels like it's not aligned, and then the process isn't great, so that you go, this just feels like wearing somebody else's clothes. Like I don't want to do this. And I know for me, like I have to own my process. Like I'm such a process guy. Something has to make sense to me and I have to buy into it on a deep level. And once I do that, then turn me loose. I will be you talk about momentum. That's the stuff that I can write out my system and my frameworks and methodology to the end of time because I've owned it and I know it, and it's backed by, like you said, the things of here's why I'm doing this, here's what's important to me, and there's that passion that you talked about. And I think I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because to dive in to methods, it would be like missing the first half of a movie. You're like, what's happening here? Like, I don't
Yeah, I mean, I
understand,
could
right?
fill your podcast with strategies,
Mm-hmm.
and people would go away, oh, that worked for a while. But I would much rather fill your podcast with encouraging people to think about what their life purpose is. It sounds grand. I mean, some people's life purpose is to be, I don't know, the president, CEO of a big multinational company. Other people is their life purpose is to be a great parent. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that. Be a great sibling. Leave the world a better place than when they arrived. Life purposes are very personal. And the other thing that with that is identity, your core identity, who you are. So I now run everything past, and it isn't like a great spiritual revelation. I think I've always done it instinctively. If every decision I make now gets run past, is this who I am? Am I showing up as myself today? If I get into the realm of I need a job, I always run it past I mean, we all need money to pay the rent and keep food on the table, or the mortgage, or whatever the bills we've got to pay, of course. And we have to be practical about that. But I will get out of that as quickly as I can if it's not congruent with my identity or my life purpose. They are different things. Identity is, who am I being today? I mean, I was in the gift trade. That was my family business, right? And I got out of it because I grew up in it. I was in a beautiful part of the world, absolutely stunning British medieval thatched village. But I was selling, the global word is gifts, but I called it grot. And in Devon, where I live in England, the tourists are it is a fond term, we call them grockles. So my way of making a living was I sold grot to the grockles. And I remember watching, I don't watch soaps at all, but I was flicking channels on TV one day, and this Australian soap popped up, and this couple were having an argument in their corner shop. Why don't you love me? Of course I love you, Marlene. Of course I love you. What are you doing that for then? What do you mean? Why do you want to go get in a yacht and sail around the world for a year and leave me while you do that? And he said, it isn't anything to do with you. It's to do with the fact that I can't see myself dying, getting to the pearly gates, and there's the angel Gabriel there greeting me, and I'm me saying to him, "Oh, gee, Gabriel, give me just one more day in the shop." And I thought, I remember that. That was like 25 years, 30 years ago. And I'm like, that's me. I literally cannot get up tomorrow morning and stomach the idea of another day in these shops selling grot to the grockles. And I then did a massive, that's why I trained as a life coach, because actually what I'm passionate about is working with people. I love people, but I don't want to sell them grot. I can't, this is, I would sell mugs like this. It's a very nice mug, but I'm sorry, it's a mug. And I don't care if it's got pretty pictures on it or not. It's just a mug. But if that is a metaphor for spending more time with your children and having quality time with your children, or having your dream life in terms of you've got time freedom and money freedom and health freedom, yes, please sign me up for that. I'm all about that. Definitely. If somebody's trying to get there and they're still focused on paying the rent, or they are paying the rent, but they're doing stuff that they hate doing, or they're doing really well, but they want to do a lot better they've got bigger dreams, bigger things going on. Absolutely. Sign me up. I'm more than happy to work with people on getting those results, but please don't ask me to sell any more mugs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So much of what you were talking about in terms of asking those deeper questions goes right back to what you said earlier in having thinking time, because you need that time and that space, that margin to ask those questions, to sit with it, and sometimes ask those questions repeatedly, because it's not usually the kind of thing that you sit down, write something down, and the first thing that pops out is like, oh, there it is. At least in my experience, it tends to be something that you need to sit with and continue to ask questions and probe deeper to make sure you haven't just settled on an answer as opposed to the answer, if you will, right? And that takes time. It takes intention to unpack that. And so that having that intentional time, that thinking time, I think is so huge.
Yes. Can I just add something to
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Included in the thinking time, there's an absolutely essential part, which is not thinking time. Having an empty mind. In terms of in spiritual, I'm not going to get spiritual here, but in spiritual practice, they talk about emptying your mind. And I was always like, huh? How can I empty my mind? I don't know how to do that. But it is just literally going quiet, being silent. I don't know, still don't know to this day how to empty my mind. But I do know that sometimes it's a really good idea just to not think. Because then you get into the realms of overthinking, you get into the realms of logic. I grew up watching Star Trek. Mr. Spock was my hero. Bit of a curse as well, because logic is a terrible, it stifles creativity, of course. And so not thinking time. Mike, is so important. And so if you literally only make, right, I need to think about this. Yeah, okay. That's the strategy part of my book, right? But the understanding and the momentum comes from living your life purpose and being in your core identity. And when people say to me, I don't know, if somebody says to me, well, I'm not sure about my core identity, I say, actually, when you get it, you'll realize it's as easy as falling off a log. It's just being who you are. You need to make space to better appreciate who you are. And that comes from, I mean, I want the phrase I want to use is sitting in the silence. You know, whenever I'm stressed, I will go and sit in the countryside in the silence. Or I'll go to, I'm not a religious person, but I do think of myself as a spiritual person with a small s. I will go and sit in a religious place, which quite often, you know, they're so silent. You can hear a pin drop and it's like a tree falling over. And I'll just sit there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And although I'm thinking about stuff, my mind is all over the place. Very creative environment, isn't it, when that happens?
Yeah. 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 I'm curious, you mentioned accountability earlier. And is the goal to help guide somebody through this process so that they learn how to hold themselves accountable so that they don't need someone else? Or do you think there's a piece where you kind of always need somebody else?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I prefer to get them to the point where they don't need an accountability coach. But for some people, they will always feel that they do. But what we do is we look at strategies, we look at, you know, I guess I'm a proud dad when they eventually say to me, I don't need this anymore, right? That's perfect. And it's certainly part of my strategy is, yeah, what's the end game? Can we get to the point where you are self-sustaining? For some people, though, it's just they just need that little nudge. They just need it. They just need that. I don't want to let him down. This is why I personally believe AI will never replace accountability coaching because it's a machine. You know, I don't care if I let the machine down, but I do care if I let Mike down. Mike's going to be disappointed in me. Now, if I'm self referenced to the point that I don't care what Mike thinks or anybody else thinks of me, accountability coaching might not work for me very well, but there will be people in your life that you do care about and you don't want to let them down. So I'm waffling a bit. I think it comes down to the individual, but certainly the whole point of the book is that it's, I guess 90% of the book is self-actuation. It's about this is how you can help yourself. The accountability, it's not a sales book for accountability. I mention accountability and saying, here is a strategy that you might find will work for you. And the research is there that it does work very well. It increases, they did some research in 2007 that proved that accountability increases your productivity by as much as 33% a month. That's not hundreds of a percent. I'm not being unrealistic, but you think about 33% a month of business productivity exponentially over the course of a year. You are looking at a fantastic return on your investment. But there must come a point where it's like, okay, right, I can do this now without Robin or without whoever they hire as an accountability coach. So the book is mostly 90% of it is, maybe 95% of it is, these are things you can do for yourself. And for the very few of you, you may find that accountability coaching comes in. But yeah, definitely. One of the first things we have is a conversation about, okay, let's work out where the off ramp is. At what point will we be able to say, yeah, you don't need this anymore. You're good to go. Definitely. But that's, I guess, the issue with that is it's very individual.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I love that you've created these resources and you're having these conversations, helping people move through these blocks and the procrastination that can stop. I mean, so many areas of life, like you said earlier, it can really be something that makes you go, man, I really should have done this. I really could have done this. And instead, you're offering tools to help people power through to be able to, like, no, like, have a clear picture of that and know what you want. And let's actually do the work of moving forward and moving through this, and having the accountability is amazing. And a resource like your book to be able to help people with the self-actualization part, I think is tremendous too, because to sit with that and to start asking yourself those questions, start going through the process, nothing is going to replace that, and that nobody's going to do that for you. And so thank you for creating that kind of resource for people. As we kind of wrap up our time today, I would love to hear, like, people are listening to you and they're like, Robin, this is amazing. I need to know, like, where can I get this book, and how can I follow you? How can I learn more from you? Can you let people know a little bit of where can they get the book and follow you?
Sure, I'd love to. If I just wrap up one thing that you were saying there, which is about the classic procrastinator's mantra is, I'll do it tomorrow. And so after I'd published the book, I realized, well, actually, what I've created is a momentum formula. And I've just reworded I'll do it tomorrow. The momentum formula, and I put it on a bottle of shampoo to remind people, do it today, profit tomorrow, and repeat. That's what it's
Nice.
about, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Because if you do it today, that's going to make a big difference to I'll do it tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes, of course. So yeah, people can find me. I guess the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. Just look up Robin J. Emdon on LinkedIn. I'm probably the only Emdon with EMDON, Robin J. Emdon in the world. I'm pretty sure of that. And also, if the book, they can buy it if they want to on Amazon as a Kindle or a published book. But I don't want to do that. I'm happy I'd be honored if they did that. But I decided right from the get-go, I want to get this technology out there. So I'm giving it away as an unabridged PDF. And if people would like to get a download of their own copy as an unabridged PDF, then they just go to reallyusefultips.com. That's really as in, yeah, I really mean it. Useful as in, yeah, it's really useful, and tips as in, I don't know, tips, TIPS, reallyusefultips.com. I came up with a memorable thing, and even I struggle to remember it, but reallyusefultips.com, that'll take you straight to a page where you can get a download of the PDF with my absolute compliments, and email me. I always reply. Every email gets read. Email me. In fact, I encourage you, if you've read the first chapter, to sign a pledge to say you're going to read the rest, because that's the biggest problem with procrastinators. We don't follow through.
Exactly.
We suffer from this thing called, the Japanese call it Sundoku, where we collect lots of books, but then we just have books and books and books that we never read. And I mentioned that in the book. So don't be one of those. Read it. Definitely read it. And yeah, that's how they can do it.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your generosity, and for, again, getting this tool in the hands of people. And I'm sure it's impacted many lives already, but it's going to impact so many more lives. And I do encourage anyone who's watching or listening right now to make sure that you take Robin up on that, and download his book, and get the published one too on Amazon. Throw him some funds, because all the things that we do, that we create, that we want to have impact on the world. It's great to be able to do that and offer free resources, but also, like you said earlier, we do need to put food on the table and make a living of some things too. So in whatever way people can support, I always encourage that as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you again for our time today, because it's just a pleasure hearing your story, and again, getting to know you a little bit better. So I wish you all the best in that.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure getting to meet you again too, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.